Hello and welcome to the NCSS C3 Collaborative Literacy Professional Development webinar, What Every School Administrator Should Know About the C3 Framework. This webinar, along with others in our series, is part of the College Career and Civic Life Framework for Social Studies State Standards Literacy Collaborative, C3LC, which NCSS is implementing in collaboration with the National Center for Literacy in Education and which is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. My name is Anna Post, and I am the Director of External Relations and Council Communications at NCSS, as well as this grants coordinator. The goal of this C3LC initiative is to create and operationalize a plan designed specifically for social studies teachers to implement the Common Core State Standard for English Language Arts by utilizing the C3 framework. To learn more about the C3 Literacy Collaborative and take a look at the resources that have been developed, please visit www.socialstudies.org/C3/C3LC. We are so pleased to have Michael Lavorne and Michelle Herzog doing this presentation today. Michael is Assistant Professor of Social Studies Education in the Department of Instruction and Learning at the University of Pittsburgh. He is also the President of the National Social Studies Supervisors Association. Michelle is Consultant 3 of History Social Science in the Los Angeles County Office of Education and recently finished her term as NCSS President. Without further ado, let me turn over the presentation to Michael and Michelle.
Hello, everyone. Happy to have you here. Happy to have you along. I see several names that were with us last week, so it's a pleasure to have you here.
And hello from Michelle Herzog here. It was really wonderful working on this presentation with Michael. This has really been a great collaborative effort. I'm going to start with some overview opening slides, and then I'm going to pass it over to Michael. We dedicated two of our webinars for our audience of school administrators because, as we know, if we want to effectively implement any kind of initiative, especially something as important as the C3 framework, you want to have all your stakeholders on board. You want administrators to know about it. You want them to support that effort, community members, parents, the public. And so we intentionally created two of these. We did there's a previous one that we had put together. You can find that archived on the website that Anna articulated the URL for us. And this particular one is to give us some more background to help administrators. I'm going to start with a very brief overview of the C3. We certainly encourage you to share those introductory webinars on the C3 framework with your administrators and other stakeholders. But we'll go quickly through some opening slides and then kind of target our talk to administrators. So as many of you know, as you can see from this slide, this development of the C3 framework was a huge effort. It involved 23 states, local affiliates such as my office, the LA County Office of Ed, University of Delaware, lots of professional organizations, writers, teachers. Truly was an ongoing effort. Took 3 years and was finally published on September 17th. You know that date, Constitution Day, 2013. Can't believe it's almost, well, it's over 2 years now. And as you know, a lot of our great organizations around the social studies were part of this in very big ways, intentional ways. You'll recognize all our national organizations representing geography, civics, history, and economics, all very much involved in the development, which gives us some great credibility, I think, in the field. Now, the objectives of this webinar, as we mentioned briefly, was to kind of acquaint our administrator audience of the goal and design of the C3 framework. We're going to go into that quickly. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time looking at some observational protocols that can be used by site administrators or others when they observe classrooms. Obviously, we want principals in classrooms seeing the great work that's done with the C3, but we want to help them with some tools that they can use to help look for particular things and then use in a collaborative way to help inform the practice with teachers and moving that forward. As you know, the ultimate goal of the C3 is for students to study our 4 disciplines, civics, economics, geography, and history, to become active and engaged citizens. Now, this will take on different nuance depending on what and how things are taught in local districts and schools. So, for example, in some places, traditionally there may be a large history component, but could be light on civics, economics, and geography. We want all four of those to have a heightened awareness because there's no way we can separate them when we're talking about events of the past, the present, and the future. And of course, the ultimate thing is, why do we learn this? So that young people are prepared with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to be engaged citizens. If you're familiar with the C3 framework, this will look familiar to you. It's the inquiry arc that centers on the 4 dimensions of how we best recommend the teaching of social studies. I'm going to go through those very quickly. First of all, dimension 1, and you can read about it in the C3 on these pages 23 to 28, talks about developing questions and planning inquiries to really start off any great social studies lesson with a compelling question, something that's going to get kids excited about learning that topic, and of course, bringing on some supporting questions to kind of guide their investigation and study. As they move into dimension 2, we want them to dig into the content. You know, this is not content free. This is a big emphasis on rigorous content learning. And as I mentioned, we want them to look at all these different aspects of the content: civics, economics, history, geography. And I bet most social studies teachers are familiar with many of these topics and issues that surround these 4 main categories of the social studies. This is something not new to teachers. This is about evaluating sources and using evidence. You've got that compelling question. We want kids to look at multiple perspectives, gather all kinds of information, and be able to analyze, synthesize, make sense of it, come up with some claims based on evidence. This use of evidence is something we're seeing very much within the Common Core. But also, if you're not a Common Core state, the purpose for reading, for writing, for putting out a position, an opinion, should be backed with evidence that you're finding in informational text. And so here again in social studies, this is a really good match for that. And finally, when students come up with those conclusions based on the evidence and the research they've gathered and analyzed, we want them to come up with a conclusion and then act on it. Now, when we say taking informed action, that could mean all kinds of things. If you're studying an issue in the past about immigration, that might inform an action that young people might want to take on immigration policy today. Reaching out to a legislator, a policymaker, a petition, something really active and civically engaged. But it may not. It may just mean, let's apply the knowledge by sharing what we've learned with another group, by making a presentation, by engaging others in a larger conversation. So not everything you learn or teach is going to land in the Supreme Court, but we want this to be emphasized that teaching should be applied in realistic ways. And of course, we're talking a lot about the Common Core. That's the focus of this grant, but and so we were very intentional in developing the C3 framework to have alignment to the Common Core state standards for English language arts. And I think this is a good thing about the Common Core, I have to say, is that what it is blurring the lines between reading and the subject matters. You just don't read reading. You read content. You read things that have substance in science, in social studies. And so it makes sense that when we're reading informational texts and writing persuasive essays and opinion writing and speaking with formal academic language, that we can draw from and integrate very smoothly with the social studies. So, and we know too, that in the Common Core, if you've spent some time with that, you'll know there are college and career readiness anchor standards. Those are the standards that are kind of defining the outcomes on what does it really mean to be college and career ready. And you will see if you dig into the C3 framework, those connections, those alignments. This is just a snapshot of some of them on where you can find how things in the C3 correlate and support the teaching and meeting of the Common Core state standards for English language arts. Here again, even if you're not a Common Core state, there's no denying that good teaching of social studies builds reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language skills for all students. So now I want to turn this over to Mike, and he's going to talk a little bit here of the overview of the supervisor's role, because, you know, supervisors do have a big role if we want to successfully implement the C3 framework.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Michelle. Some great examples there. Once again, I want to say that it's been a real pleasure working with you and Anna on these two webinars, and we couldn't have done this without Anna's help, so I wanted to mention her as well. But you've been a great collaborator, so I've enjoyed working with you on this. And it is important work, and we're happy to have all of our attendees, and many of whom who have come back. So this webinar is designed for your participation. I just want everybody to know that we're building on last week's work, but we are doing some unique things today. You'll have several opportunities to share your thoughts, and we would invite you to make comments and ask questions in the chat box that you can find on the lower right-hand side of the screen. And we'll pause several times to welcome your input, but we'd love for it to be a highly participatory webinar. And so feel free to share any questions or comments that you have. Now, looking at this slide, we can see something that we touched on these points last week. We see an overview of the supervisor's role in implementation of the C3 framework. These are all very important points, and as Michelle mentioned, while this webinar is not only being attended by administrators and supervisors, that there may be teachers and educators in other positions who are here with us today. But we have developed this particular set of slides from the positionality of an administrator who's considering implementing the C3 framework in his school or district. Okay, so with this in mind, we see these 5 overarching roles for supervisors and administrators in the implementation of the framework. We think that these are interesting lenses through which we can see what the administrator's role is inevitably going to be. And these are not unique criteria. These could be applied to many different things that we do in schools, but I would invite your comments on this as after I go over each of these. I'm just going to summarize. Certainly we need knowledge. This has to do a lot with new knowledge and then reconceptualizing knowledge that we already have about what we do as instructors. As an instructional leader, it's your responsibility to understand the shifts required by the C3 framework. These standards are different from previous measures and challenge what we know about standards-based education. Embracing your role as an instructional leader means knowing the content your teachers need to teach. So that's nothing new, but the ways in which that we look at them and, dare I say, evaluate them or observe them may be changing a bit. And understanding the shifts that they need to make in their practice to put this implementation into action, right? So next we have vision. Implementing the C3 framework is an excellent opportunity for focus and coherence throughout your school. The standards provide a thread that can run through the fabric of your organization and encourages symmetry among teachers' approaches to their content, which is a good thing. A lot of times you can walk into a social studies hall and see many different things going on, and there are advantages and benefits to that. But one thing I think the C3 does in terms of providing a vision for our teachers is that it gives them very predictable outline goals, things that they can set out to accomplish, right? In terms of metrics, and we know that this is important as well, as with any successful change management exercise, it'll be critical to have clear measurable goals and to commit to collecting data on progress toward those goals so that appropriate adjustments and supports can be implemented. Of course, we all know that data is so very important, and we have taken that into consideration in this implementation as well. Building capacity. Support teachers by offering focus and coherence in their work. Of course, we all do that. Support their understanding of those standards, and that will take some time because some of these incorporate different ideas and new approaches. recognizing their authentic development and change, and provide them with quality tools and resources. And we're not talking about quick fixes here. We're talking about things that are going to challenge and in some ways revolutionize the ways in which they perceive and share their content. So we want this to be a capacity building effort. Find your early adopters and make them champions and advocates for the work of the C3 framework. Always a good idea. Finally, with staying engaged, we want to continue to seek out current information on consortia assessments, best practices, criteria for quality materials. The websites that were mentioned earlier are terrific resources. As you see in the chat box, Anna has posted the socialstudies.org web page for the C3. I encourage you to visit that. And we also have a resources page that has free materials available. So we encourage you to take a look at that and share that with your teachers as well. But visit those websites and utilize the archived webinars and resources. Things are changing, but all this information is available for you at your fingertips. So with that, looking back over these, does anyone like to have anything they would like to say regarding knowledge or vision, metrics, building capacity, or staying engaged? Questions or comments about any of those criteria for supervisory roles? I see Michelle is chiming in. On this note, I call your attention specifically to vision. I believe one of the things that I try to teach my teacher candidates is creating a vision for where they want to go. We do in our lesson planning, this is a big deal. Thinking down the road and thinking way ahead of what is going to be accomplished is very important, right? So Michelle is asking, what has been developed so far in terms of metrics? Michelle Herzog, do you have any points to share in terms of what we're actually implementing in terms of how we're measuring? Or do we have any existing measurements?
We don't know of any existing things. You know, there's been a big movement in a number of educational settings to look at more formative classroom-based assessment, just as a way to measure our progress as we go through lessons, and really working with teachers to kind of develop some of those metrics themselves. We all know about the big Smarter Balance and PARC consortium tests. You know, that's not going to really accurately measure, I think, what we hope to accomplish with the C3. But at some point, you will want to work with teachers and ask those questions. How do we know kids are learning? How do we know they're acquiring the skills and knowledge we want them to? And how can we, as a teacher team and administrators, collaboratively come up with some measures to measure some of those formative pieces, and maybe even end-of-unit summative pieces?
Michelle. And Michelle also participating. Michelle, thank you very much for your question. One thing we'll do in a few moments is look at an observational protocol form that we created to give a little guidance here. I think that might be maybe a starting conversation point for developing one on a local level to collect that data. Since that data oftentimes is district wide or district specific or localized, that'll help in guiding how we might be able to measure some of those things. So going on to the next slide. I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you know, another place to look is the c3teachers.org. They have just completed a whole plethora of lessons, and I believe there may be some assessment type items in some of those pieces as well. So I would, let me put that in the chat here. That might be another resource.
Thank you. And I see that we're getting a question from Corey, so we'll wait on that as well. Thank you, Michelle. Jessica is also typing, so we'll give her a moment too. Incidentally, in looking and thinking about the knowledge that's changing, you know, good teachers have been doing these things for a long time. So a lot of the knowledge base is not completely revolutionary. These are things that we've done. However, the ways and means in which we take an overview of our social studies teacher or our social studies department, is maybe we can give you some pointers on how to do that, right? Corey says that the blueprints has great blueprints to begin with. I would agree with that. Jessica says also that in C3 teachers there are suggested formative and summative performance tasks. Very good. Thank you, Jessica. And I do find that to be a very good resource as well. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen that so far. So thank you, all three of you, for participating in that. So going on to the next slide. As you see here, I've got a couple of questions to sort of prompt a little bit more of a conversation on this, considering the things that you already do and what the C3 might bring to you. As instructional leaders, it's critical to know the major implications of the C3 framework. Without an understanding of what the big picture looks like, every decision and action made to support the implementation may be at risk. So as we've mentioned, the C3 is relatively new in many educational communities. As a leader, this is an important opportunity for you to not only model quality leadership, but quality learning as well. That process of learning will continue over the next several years. Your learning and leading in this work will likely impact your work over the next 5+ years. It's imperative that as leaders you take time now to engage in and learn the standards beginning with the shifts. So we can take a look at some of the questions that I have here. Visionary leadership in the work of implementing the C3 framework means closely examining the decisions that are under your control. We understand that it may be easy to see this initiative as something that is too large to handle very well. Something imposed from forces outside of your school, and oftentimes teachers will maybe see things that way. It's our hope that leaders will resist the pull to feel victim to this initiative or to react by merely complying in a very superficial manner. We really want this to be something that schools embrace and see the value in. There is such great value in it, but a lot of it is a very organic developmental sort of a relationship. So the framework provides a real opportunity to make sense of the work for teachers, sharing the vision of the framework that more students leave high school prepared for college, career, and civic life will help to motivate faculty when the vision is communicated through the actions and decisions of leadership. Now, this slide indicates just some of the opportunities that instructional leaders have to bring focus and coherence to this work. So don't leave the work of making connections among C3 framework implementations, efforts, and other activities in the school or district to the teachers alone. We should do this ourselves, right? And those connections should be obvious and overt. So with this in mind, why don't we take a few moments to discuss each of these questions? And we will let's take them one at a time. How about that? So how might the C3 framework impact professional development for teachers? Does anyone have a comment or question regarding that? I see Jessica's typing. And in thinking about time here, if you would like, you can take a look at the next questions while we're having our participants typing. What will transition and implementation phases look like? And how might the C3 framework impact classroom observations and teacher evaluations? The dreaded teacher evaluation conversation. I see my good friend Rebecca Reed is typing. It's nice to see you here, Rebecca. Jessica says we need to model good instruction in the shifts. If we don't want teachers to stand and deliver, we should not stand and deliver. Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I think a lot of times it is a matter of getting the teachers on board and seeing all of the very great valuables that there are here, rather than making it sound like we're just imposing this upon them, right? Very good point, Jessica. Thank you. Sherry Lynn is typing. Rebecca says the inquiry arc should serve as a template or process for professional development. For example, start with a compelling question, not just a statement of objectives. Very good. And I think that's exactly what we hope to accomplish with the entire C3, is to begin with questions and have students more skilled at not only asking but pursuing reasonable and meaningful answers to those questions in a real world setting with substantive conversation a lot of the things that many of us didn't get in our social studies education when we were younger, right? Jessica says, lead your faculty meeting with a compelling question. Wonderful idea. Wonderful idea. Got a couple more comments coming in here. Thank you all, by the way, for your participation. Okay, so that's very good. So what will the transition implementation phases look like? I see that Sherry Lynn is still typing, so we'll address Sherry Lynn's comment in a moment. But think about these other questions too. Do you have other questions that should be posed for our consideration? I like the comment that we read a little bit earlier about keying on those who sort of are your superstars, and they take it and they implement it, and they are effective and successful at that, and maybe using their experiences to guide and provide guidance to their peers, right? Sherry Lynn says, can you share some best practices aligned with the effective lesson instruction for middle school? So I can let Michelle chime in on that and share some if she has some exact best practices that she'd like to share.
Yeah, sure. There's plenty of great things out there. In fact, there's another webinar on the C3LC page on create your own lessons for social using the C3, where we introduce some lesson plan templates, and we talk about how do you align what you're currently doing to make it more C3 friendly. You know, no one likes to come to a workshop and hear the message, well, everything you're doing needs to be tossed out. You need to start all over. So guiding people to recognize what are the best practices they're currently doing, looking at the C3 4 dimensions, how might you stretch or alter or align what you're doing to really make it start with more compelling questions. That usually is kind of a shift for some. And then thinking about on the back end how to apply it. But I think if you go back to socialstudies.org/C3, you'll see access to other webcasts. You'll see links to other webcasts that have done that show other examples. And don't forget the C3 teacher site. We're starting to see more and more things bubble up. And if you can make it to the New Orleans conference, there's going to be dozens of sessions there of on-the-ground teachers sharing their work and their lessons too. So we're starting to see a lot of great examples out there.
We agree with that, and I think also, again, Jessica's recommendation to lead with a compelling question. Let's not overlook that. I think that's a wonderful way to start a lesson at any level, in middle school or high school, and maybe a question that you come back to multiple times throughout the lesson.
The other point I try to make with teachers too, because I conduct a lot of professional development and trying to do a lot with the C3 frameworks, is to show folks that this is a tool to help you meet the other goals and initiatives that you are charged with achieving at your site. So I know a lot of teachers in California are being told, all teachers, social studies too, what are you doing to meet Common Core? What are you doing to meet Common Core? So we frame the C3 as their ticket. If you align your social studies to a C3 format, you're going to get to Common Core. You're going to get to Partnership for 21st Century Skills, if that's an initiative. You're going to get to all the other good critical thinking types of curriculums or initiatives that your district is trying to do. And that really relieves a lot of anxiety, because now you're giving them something that's going to help them achieve the goals that they are charged to achieving in a way that's useful for them. So I found that to be very, very useful too. Oh yeah, and I'm glad Susan Griffin's reminding us that, yeah, there's another great webinar on there from SG Grant, just totally dedicated to crafting a compelling question. And so that's what we were purposeful in these webinars, is really drilling down on very specific areas to help support teachers get their heads around these different pieces. Because it's almost, you can't just throw the book at them and the framework at them and say, okay, do this. We want to give them time. You want to dedicate time. You want to dedicate collaborative time, sharing time, practice time, reflection time to really give them a safe space to get into this slowly but effectively. So good. All the links are up there. Anna's throwing them up. Yeah, hang on to those, and please, please encourage your colleagues, teachers you work with, to spend some time on them. They're all free, online, available. So that's something we decided to do for everyone. Don't even have to be an NCSS member. But of course, after you see them, you're going to want to join NCSS.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. Now, Michelle, I have a question for you. As you can see, Mary's question about videotaping exemplars or good examples that then can be shown to teachers. Do you know if any exist or if there are plans to do this? I think this would be a wonderful idea. But I know that there are some issues with videotaping here in Pittsburgh, for instance, that would be a bit of an impediment to doing that. We could probably make it work, but that would be a wonderful resource.
Right. Well, there's a short 5-minute video that you'll see on the NCSS site and also on my LACO site. I'll put the link in here. And it's a 5th grade example with wonderful teacher Rebecca Valbuena. It's just a snapshot of what does it look like in a 5th grade classroom. I've done some other webcasts here at LACO, and they have snippets in there where you can see. But yeah, you're right. It's difficult to create a full-length video of a whole class lesson. And it's time-consuming and costly and all those things. But there are some good short examples out there.
Sure. And I would imagine that some of those examples could probably be created locally as well once the ball gets rolling. I think that would be a really terrific initiative there. And maybe an opportunity to do some in-house stuff as well. Okay, so moving, I see we have several folks typing. We will definitely get to everybody. I just want to make sure that you get a chance to see our observational protocol. So we're going to continue the conversation and just focus it just a bit here. And I see Susan saying that Rebecca will be presenting in New Orleans. Okay, that's terrific. So there, again, more reasons to go to the Big Easy, right? So let's see what this might look like in practice. So if you will, take a look at this observational protocol that I just put up there. And then we'll call this 1 because I have another one I want to share with you in a moment. Now, we want to it's worth mentioning here that we understand that the phrase teacher evaluation, quote unquote, is a hot button phrase, an issue. And that we know that how this is defined and used varies greatly from state to state. Please keep in mind that the C3 framework is not intended to supplant or supersede existing observational criteria or to become some means by which teachers are evaluated. So we're not talking about creating necessarily an evaluation from this, or I know that can be a dicey conversation with teachers, but we use this term here as a means by which supervisors and peers observe teachers' progress. Now, what does that mean? We place a lot of value not only on supervisory observations, but also peer evaluations, and we think that what we're going to show you in a moment could be used for both. It's very adaptable, I think. But we see it as we're building on to, not replacing, but building on to and enriching your existing observational mechanisms and what you use. So we're looking now, I believe, at slide 16. Adding inquiry-based ways of knowing and evaluative components such as introductions to inquiry supporting questions. We talked about that earlier. Jessica had posted on regarding that. How about calling upon or engaging students with appropriate data sources to address questions? These are strategies that can be implemented with relative ease. Introduction of key concepts to address questions. Key strategies to address questions. And evidence-backed claims, which is actually one of my favorite. One of the things that I work with my pre-service teachers on is evidence-backed class assignments and lessons. And one of the lessons that they have to develop for me and then teach during their student teaching is an evidence-based lesson. So, and I'm using the C3 to do that even in the teacher education program we have here. Expecting teachers to notate or elaborate upon inquiry-related lesson components prior to observation. These are sorts of things that you could have your teachers do. Anybody who's doing these types of things now already that you would like to share? Well, what we would like for you to do is consider implementing some of these things into the ways that you observe your teachers, giving them an opportunity, once you start to implement the C3 framework, giving them an opportunity to articulate what it is that they're doing that is C3 related, right? So now moving to the next example, or this is an extended conversation of the last one. Let's talk just a moment about your classroom observation process. What is it that you do? You conduct unannounced as well as announced visits. If so, describe how these two approaches differ. Anybody want to tackle that one? What sorts of things do you do? And in thinking about that, what are your criteria for success? When you walk in and you see a teacher, and again, it's a dicey conversation to talk about teacher evaluation per se, but just concentrate on the observational components there. I see Rebecca is typing, so we'll wait on her. Okay, so very good information. So Rebecca is saying that the unannounced are shorter and may not include face-to-face reflection and coaching. Sure, okay. And Jessica's typing in. I have implemented, as a teacher educator, I've implemented the C3 in my classroom visits. So I have in my lesson plan, which are understanding by design, I added a component for them to describe in a narrative form the means by which they are addressing the C3 framework. And of course, all my visits are announced because of scheduling and the teacher, they're mentor teachers, but we do have time to reflect on it. And I get a lot of really terrific feedback. I actually think that it's helped make a little bit more sense out of understanding by design for my teacher candidates. Jessica says, when I coach teachers, they're often worried about, worried to take risks and try something new if there's a score. Very good point, Jessica. My students do that as well. As a professional developer, I have helped model lesson ideas. Very good. Students doing the work, Rebecca says. Good. I agree. I think that it needs to be a safe place to try something new. That's not only for novice teachers, but that's for our veteran teachers as well, especially when we're adding to the complexity or varying the complexity of our classroom observations, right? Susan says that I'd expect to see students lead discussion. Absolutely. There was an article out not long ago in Theory and Research in Social Education about substantive conversation with students. And I found that to be a really great way to word it. And I think the C3 incorporates that as well. Real world connections and substantive conversation. Very good. Want to see students asking the questions. Very good. It'd be a wonderful way to make the case that they are getting the point or the objective of the lesson, right? Make argument writing. Very good. All right, some really terrific examples of what you're seeing. Now, a couple of other questions are based on our earlier discussion. What might you expect to see in the classroom? Okay, you just answered that one. How might your observation protocol change or adapt based on these efforts? Anything that you would do differently than what you're already doing? Corey says not only student-led discussions and inquiry, but also taking action or drawing evidence-based conclusions. Absolutely. Good points. And one might very well lead to the other. And we're waiting on Rebecca, and Jessica will have something to say here. Principals may need to take a role in taking informed action. Sure. Rebecca says Dimension 4 helps make topics relevant. Absolutely. I actually look for that relevance in every classroom visit I make, for sure. And that's another point that I have my students articulate on their lesson plans. And by my students, I'm talking about my teacher candidates. I have them articulate their real-world connection. Expect to see lesson designs using IBM. Right. Very good. Very good. Excellent participation. So keep them coming. Keep them coming. I'm going to show you another observational protocol just before we run out of time here. This is a wonderful conversation that we're having. Very good. Teachers want to be asked about relevancy as well. Very good. As a professional, okay, so Corey says, doesn't evaluate teachers, but as a professional developer, I worry about those who do. Expect to only see literacy. Absolutely, it's a valid concern. It would look quite a bit different, Corey. Yes, good observation. Okay, so moving along and building on this just a bit. This, if you would take a moment, and I'm going to invite Michelle back into the conversation here if she'd like to contribute. If you take a moment to download the observation form. If you look on your right-hand column under Documents for Participant Download, if you would take a look at that, if you can. If not, it's okay because I have most of the text actually in the PowerPoint here, so you'll see most of it. And in looking at this, let's take a look at, this is what I'm terming Observational Protocol number 2. You'll take a moment to download that. In many ways, this form is quite typical of observations we've all performed, and even some of the same language that you might see on some of those teacher evaluations, right? And the idea here is not, again, not reinventing the wheel, but maybe reconceptualizing some of these terms. If you look at the observation form, we're talking about looking, and feel free to chime in if you would add or if any of these areas are problematic, considering the C3 conversation we just had. Feel free to type into the chat box. But what we're thinking of is that if you had an observation, you could base it on checking for subject matter content, which would be a little bit enriched, I think, with Dimension 2 of the C3. The teacher's organization, their rapport with students, actual teaching methods or the pedagogy that they're using, their means of presentation, are they just lecture, are they using multiple sources of information and media, moving right along, how do they manage, of course, management of their classroom, sensitivities to different areas. In social studies we have very unique opportunities to teach students about empathy and having them understanding and commiserate with certain populations, and so that sensitivity factor would be a big one there. Providing assistance to students and having different things about, how are they in their front of the room presence and their personal presence and physical aspects of the classroom. Of course, we all look for those, right? In enriching this, we might add a couple of components that are related to the C3, adding them to our regular observation, right? And you're taking a look at the observation form. We've added them in there as well. Now this is not something that's very unique. We added the C3 components, but the rest of this is something that you probably have on most of your observation forms. But looking at Dimension 1, are teachers sharing compelling questions or supporting questions? Developing questions and planning those inquiries? What would you expect to see? Does anybody want to share there? Prior to the lesson, what would those of you who make observations of your teachers, what would you expect to see, or what would you like to see in terms of meeting this requirement for Dimension 1? Anybody who would like to see that in advance? Compelling questions that focus on real social problems, issues, curiosities. There's that real-world connection that we were just talking about, right? Supporting questions that scaffold students' investigations into the ideas and issues behind a compelling question. Okay, from there we move to Dimension 2, applying those disciplinary tools and concepts. We'll wait for Corey's going to write in here. In thinking about Dimension 2, that's where we get a lot of our content. How are we reconceptualizing that content and presenting it to students in a way that will allow them to explore those compelling questions, right? As teachers in my district begin, I'd like to see teachers develop compelling questions and students asking those supporting questions. Absolutely. That sounds like a nice balance. Thank you for your participation again, Corey. I think that'd be terrific. That'd be one way to do it for sure. The teacher starts with a question and then the support comes from the students. Sure. Susan is typing. Any thoughts on what you might see a little bit differently in terms of Dimension 2 or Dimension 3? Our evaluation, of course, is going to be critical here, opportunities to analyze a variety of source materials and to support claims and counterclaims. And if you haven't taken a look at it in a while, I would encourage you to take a look actually at the wording of the framework for that Dimension 3. I get a lot out of that, and the Dimension 4 with my teacher candidates. We look at that. There's Dimension 4, communicating conclusions and taking that informed action, which we heard earlier might need the principals to help out, right? Susan says our professional development efforts will be centered around compelling and supporting questions. That is definitely a shift, sure. So you can see sort of some of the things Jessica's typing in here, just to reiterate, and performance tests. Very good, Jessica. That's right. And that brings it together with the understanding by design language that a lot of us are in teacher education are using, right? So communicating conclusions and taking informed actions. And then we have a component for disciplinary literacy, of course, as well, promoting reading, writing, speaking, and listening, to reiterate what Michelle was saying earlier, and to bring it in alignment with the Common Core.
Michael, if I could chime in for a minute here.
Of course.
You know, if you've been on either end of this, if you've been the teacher who has been observed by an administrator, or you're an administrator who's going and observing teachers, you know there's a big range in how to do this kind of work effectively. And I think what most of us would probably agree is it really starts with the culture of your school. So if your school environment is such that administrators and teachers are working on the same page, they have a common understanding, a common vision, a common commitment to really learning what each other's roles are, you're going to have a more productive observational feedback loop experience. You know, we know that administrators cannot be experts in all content areas, and nor can we expect them to. But I think what's really powerful is if you're introducing something new like this or innovative, you want administrators too to be able to understand exactly what they're looking for. And this is why we encourage administrators to deepen their knowledge of the C3, even if they're not a history major in college themselves, but to understand some of the pedagogies we're getting to understand how it's trying to be relevant and meaningful, how teachers are reaching out to kids and making it relevant, meaningful, and differentiating instruction when it's needed. And to meet with each other ahead of time. You know, Michael talked about unannounced visits. You know, no one likes those kinds of pop-in surprises. Although sometimes if you've got a really strong partnership with administrators and teachers, those kind of walk-ins are very welcome and warmly received. But if they starts to feel like a gotcha or an evaluation, we're not going to always get to the goal we want, which is really about strengthening social studies education. So that's why we urge administrators to take the time, learn right alongside their teachers, go deep. If I'm going to come in and look for a compelling question, I need to know what is a compelling question and what's not a compelling question. What's the difference between something that's compelling and supportive? Is it matter? And so you're kind of working from the same page, apples to apples, oranges to oranges. So we don't go into a lot of detail on how to build that type of collaborative conversations and environments, but we're moving on the assumption that I know schools are trying to work in that way.
Thank you, Michelle. So some more comments coming in. Corey asked a really great question. Do real-world problems have to be contemporary in nature? Just to speak to that for a second, Corey, what I do in my teacher ed, and I have some of the similar expectations of my teacher candidates that many of you may have of your regular daily classroom teachers, and what I expect to see when I go out to observe them. And I have actually addressed this with them, that they can give historical examples, but that it probably needs to have some means of contemporary context. So if they are talking about genocide, for instance. What examples of are in the past 15 years or so can we study that would give us some sort of real world connection to the lived experiences of our students and what the world is like today as opposed to 75 years ago, right? So, and what similarities and what differences are there? And I have been pretty successful. I think my teacher candidates find that to be really liberating. They love to be able to get into those conversations with the students and engage them in such ways. And I think the reaction from high school students has been pretty positive, that they can talk about things that are not sort of under a microscope so much that it's almost like it's not a part of the real world, but that they can make that relevance, bring that relevance to a conversational level, have substantive conversation on topics such as that. Okay, so we've got a couple of other comments here. Jessica says several inquiries are highlighted on the C3 teachers website. Good. Take past problems and make modern connections. Very good example, Jessica. Thank you. Corey says using the beginning of World War I could be a case study linked to. Absolutely. That's a very good link as well. So thank you, Jessica and Corey. Good example. We have come to just about the end of our time together. What a wonderful participatory webinar. One of the most participatory I've been involved in. Okay, so but I would like to say in closing, we'd like to reiterate that the objectives for the C3 are to enhance the rigor of the social studies disciplines. Okay, we're not reinventing things here, but we're trying to enhance that rigor. Number 2 would be to build critical thinking, problem solving, and participatory skills to become engaged citizens. Of course, we all want that. And 3, to align academic programs to the Common Core state standards for English language arts and literacy. And I think we've really outlined the framework really aligns very well with Common Core in those ways. It's our hope that this webinar has helped to advance the conversation, to orient administrators and school leaders to the design, structure, and intent of the framework, to engage them in a discussion and activities related to the implementation at the local and district level, and to consider how the framework may be utilized to help enrich observational protocols for teachers of social studies in your schools. And I would close by again directing your attention to the websites. Anna has posted several of those for you, and we encourage you to check those out. Look back at the archived materials and webinars that are at your fingertips and utilize those and utilize your resources. And stay tuned because we're developing new stuff all the time and we're really excited about it. To that, I would say we're really grateful for your hour today. We're really happy that you participated with us. And I think our email addresses are on the slides that have our pictures. But to tell you mine is mlovern, MLOVORN at pitt.edu. And I would encourage you to certainly send me an email if you have a question that you think I could help you answer, or if I can help you find the right answer, I'd be happy to do that as well. And Michelle, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It was great working with you, and thanks to Anna for getting us organized and getting us going. Yeah, just keep in touch. Keep in touch. We're always adding new resources. We're always adding new things. And we want to hear from you too. You know, it's great to capture those examples. And we're hoping that these tools might help you. I'll also point out to you, we created and put in the document pod a little C3 lesson checklist, something to use or something teachers can use with each other as well. We didn't talk much about peer observation, but that's always a powerful piece in moving the conversations forward, getting teachers working with teachers. We just never seem to have enough time to do that kind of thing. So keep sending your folks back to the socialstudies.org/C3/C3LC. And we created those things for you. So help us spread the word and the good work that we're doing. Mike, thank you so much. He's president of the NSSA. You know, you've got a great conference coming up too. And we're all looking forward to seeing you and the National Social Studies Supervisors Association.
You do indeed. And in fact, I would encourage everybody coming to NCSS to come over and give us a look on the Thursday before at NSSA. We'll have some C3 stuff going on there. One of your hosts will be there. Michelle will be there, and Susan will be there. So we look forward to seeing them, and we look forward to seeing any of you who can make it to New Orleans. And we thank you for your time today.